Right. Good morning. Good morning to all of us. Good morning, colleagues joining from, well, maybe good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to our webinar series from AFROSAI-E. We discussed with, or we mentioned that we're going to have this 4-part webinar series from, thank you very much, Shashu. Welcome. We're going to have this 4-part series on SDG and environment issues. And then we had our very first one in February. And that was, we had our guest from the Government Accountability Office in the US talking to us about bridging gaps, overlaps, fragmentations in government operations, with specific focus on the SDGs. And we all know the SDGs generally subscribe to not working in the silo system, but getting all systems working together for the benefit of the citizens. So that was a starter for us in February. And then we're here to have the second in the series. At AFROSAI-E, we had put ourselves through this very interesting, or should I call it challenging situation, where we have decided to audit 2 of the SDGs every year in a coordinated way. So we had our first 2 where we looked at SDG 5 on gender and SDG 6, water sanitation in 2022. Last year, we did audits on SDG 2.3 with a bit of 2.4. And the theme was on resilience, climate resilience strategies for agriculture and for food productivity. We also looked at SDG 4.5 that focused on education for vulnerable groups, especially children, as a focus. So what we have tried to do is to do an audit on SDGs, 2 SDGs per year. These audits are going very well. People are embracing the idea of checking what our governments are doing. But it also makes a lot of sense that we improve on our trade of auditing the SDGs. The methodology we have used basically has been on the performance audits methodology. But in order to make impact, we need to spread our wings and start looking at what we do on a regular. On our everyday audits with the financial and regularity audit methodologies, we also need to improve. So this morning, we have been able to make contact with a very reputable international group, the Global Reporting Initiative, very new wives, if I'm allowed to do it, in AFROSAI-E. We married them recently. Hopefully, this marriage should last a very long time. They are here to help us with some more deliberations on sustainability reporting. And they're looking at integrating ESG systems into integrating ESG into national systems and how to enhance public sector impact and transparency. I won't speak much into GRI. I would just introduce the key guy here, and then he does introduce the very key people going forward. It's a very interactive section. We would encourage you to put your questions in the chat box so we can have access to them as we go on. However, after the presentation, we'll have an open session where you can also unmute your button, raise your hand, and then you could be called to ask a question orally or verbally if it's put that way. So without talking much, I'd want to introduce Douglas Katuvi to take up. Douglas, so you give us a brief introduction of yourself and then maybe you set the pace for us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the opportunity to engage with AFROSAI members, AFROSAI-E members on the GRI standards, and also on the work that you're doing in terms of the auditing of the SDGs that you mentioned. And hopefully, like you said, we will be able to forge stronger collaboration and the GRI standards also helping you in the work that you're doing. It is agreed across many stakeholder groups that the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, which sets the 17 goals, 169 targets, and 232 indicators, um, provide a holistic and integrated framework to address urgent global challenges, among them ending poverty, hunger, reducing inequalities, addressing climate change, protecting the environment and biodiversity, protecting and enhancing human rights, as well as improving the quality and security of livelihoods. It is that's quite encouraging to see the SDGs that you have selected in the past 3 years in terms of your audits that you are currently doing. And to help me unpack what we are doing as an organization, I'm joined by my colleagues from our policy team based in Amsterdam, Camila, Braco, and Margarita, as well as my colleague here at the Africa Regional Hub, Bongolwetu. Camila and Margarita will share more after my few remarks, and then they will unpack GRI's work in terms of the SDGs, and also um, uh, what could also be of value to the work that you're doing, and would also be interested to hear from you, the AFROSAI members, in terms of where you see opportunities for working together and also strengthening this collaboration. Um, Most of the SDGs that the private sector companies report on are those that are linked to economic growth, climate change, and responsible consumption. These are the ones that are frequently uh, prioritized by business. So it is quite also encouraging to see AFROSAI looking at reviewing the implementation of some of the SDGs that are often less prioritized by business. So it's quite encouraging, and we look forward to learning more from what you're doing and also to contributing to the process. A core feature of the SDGs is their strong focus on the means of implementation that include the mobilization of resources, capacity building, strong institutions and their role. And in this regard, it's quite encouraging, like I said, to see the role that the supreme audit institutions are also playing in terms of accelerating the attainment of the SDGs. While the SDGs are the responsibility of national governments, they also call upon leadership from the private sector as well. Despite the market potential that has often been outlined as providing opportunities for business, progress on the implementation of the goals remain way below the levels that are required to address the lift development challenges. According to the UN Economic and Social Council report, published in 2023, the SDGs are fast disappearing in the rearview mirror, and with them, the hopes and rights of current and future generations. The report, which was based on the preliminary assessment of about 140 targets, states that only 12% of the SDGs are on track. Close to half of the targets, those showing progress, are moderately or severely off the track. And 30% have either seen no movement or have regressed below the 2015 baseline. I attended the recent not AFROSAI, Africa Roundtable on Sustainable Development. And one of the reports highlighted that Africa is making progress in 12 of the 17 SDGs. However, the current pace of progress is insufficient to achieve the goals by 2030. So there are calls to accelerate the implementation of the goals. And one of the keynote speakers, I think it was Dr. Amina Mahamat, was arguing that we're trying to accelerate the implementation, but facing a lot of challenges. I think she used the analogy of driving a Ferrari without tires. And she was saying that's kind of what we're trying to do. There's need for resources. And I think one of the challenges that came through was the lack of data to inform the implementation of the goals. And the SDGs, Goal 12, which is on sustainable consumption and production, it urges companies to track their contributions to SDGs. And the Target 12.6 calls upon the UN member states to encourage companies, especially large and transnational companies, to adopt sustainable practices and to integrate sustainability information into their reporting cycles. And this is where we have also been quite active as GRI, developing tools to help companies in terms of integrating SDGs into their business strategies, as well as tools to help businesses monitor their contributions and also to report their contribution towards the SDGs. And some of these tools and methodologies can also inform the work that you are doing as AFROSAI in terms of the audits that you are undertaking on implementing on reviewing the implementation of SDGs by member countries. Sustainability reporting creates a system of transparency and accountability that helps build trust and credibility, help companies demonstrate leadership and commitment to the SDGs. Tracking performance against targets and indicators ensures that companies and governments maximize positive contributions to SDGs and minimize negative impacts. So the work that you are doing in terms of the review of the implementation is quite critical in terms of providing the data to track progress and also to highlight where challenges are being faced and where solutions can be proffered. For over 25 years, GRI has been helping organizations to understand and communicate their sustainability impacts, and in so doing, enable dialogue between organizations and their stakeholders, facilitate the management of impacts, and their incorporation into corporate strategy and decision making. Like I mentioned, we have developed a few tools. My colleagues will highlight some of the tools that we have developed to help accelerate and to measure the contribution towards the SDGs. Like I mentioned, data for national reporting is always a challenge. And this is one of the challenges that we have been discussing with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa. Many of the national surveys on integrated and sustainability reporting focus mostly on companies that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, specifically the top 100 companies. And this methodology undoubtedly leaves thousands of companies from the national reporting, the national statistics in terms of what others are doing, and I think also leaves what is being done by public or state-owned enterprises, and that gap can also be filled by the reviews and the audits that you are undertaking. One of the challenges has been the multiplicity of standards and frameworks, lack of central repository and national architecture to monitor and track the reporting, which are compounding the challenges. There are also questions from some stakeholders on the integrity of reported data, as it would not have been subjected to external assurance or the statistical rigor that is required to give confidence for inclusion in national reporting. It would also be interesting for us to hear how AFROSAI is addressing some of these challenges and also incorporating data from non-traditional sources into the audit reviews, SDGs reviews that you are undertaking. And in conclusion, to achieve the SDGs, as well as the African Union's Agenda 2063, there's need for transformative leadership, spanning corporate and political governance, as well as capable and well-resourced institutions that can deliver on their mandates. And in this regard, we're quite happy with the collaboration that we have with the African Development Bank to play a key role in also driving or accelerating the implementation of the SDGs. Collective leadership that can turn the great economic potential obtaining on the continent into real economic growth, inclusion, employment creation, as well as value addition to the many stakeholders across the continent. I think these few remarks give sufficient context to today's session. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with GRI, and I will now call upon my colleagues, Camila, to present to us the topic of today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas, and thank you so much, Richard, for the introduction. Actually, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Margarita, to the first one speaking on our behalf. It's truly an honor to be here with AFROSAI and all the members in today's call, and we very much look forward to discussing with you, as Douglas was saying, on and what Richard was saying also on reviewing the implementation of the SDGs at the national level and the performance audit methodologies that you use, the challenges and solutions that you are facing, and also some insights from the audience on the integrity of reported data, the assurance of data, and the integration of data from non-traditional sources into national management systems. But I will leave it there. I very much look forward to engaging with you. I would now like to give the floor to my colleague Margarita, and I'm happy to talk about more on the SDGs and how GRI engages with the global agenda for sustainable development later on. Margarita, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Camila. And we can go to the next slide straight. Yeah, so, well, I'm Margarita Lysenkova. I'm part of the GRI policy team, but previously I was with the GRI standards division, responsible for the drafting of the GRI standards, and in particular the agriculture sector standards. So today I heard about the importance of that sector to you. And I would just say a few general words also about GRI. So Douglas already made the presentation of who we are, but so that you see that visually on the slide and it stays with you after. So GRI is an independent, not-for-profit organization with a multi-stakeholder governance. And that means in practical terms that we are not driven by business. No, we are driven by civil society views solely, which helps us maintain the balance and drive consensus and make sure that then the companies want to adopt our standards because they also participate in the process. So they're not just pushed, let's say, from one direction, but also they don't take over this process. So that ensures the buy-in, and that ensures very high adoption rates for the GRI standards in the world, which we will look at in a moment. Next slide. And talking about the GRI standards, so these mysterious standards, what are they in the end? So basically, so you can download it from our website if you haven't seen it, but that is a document that has a modular structure, so you can download it in parts depending on your needs. And it's not just about the reporting, what you will find in it. So we talk about disclosures, but it won't be, let's say, this table format or tick box format where you need to just put a number or put a tick. You will find there a lot of information on the expectations from business entities formulated in line with the accepted state obligations. So again, these expectations on disclosure or on corporate behavior, we don't prescribe them, we don't invent them. We have a rigorous process where we review them. Can you go maybe to the previous one? Where, yeah, we review them, basically the body of knowledge on a specific topic, and we distill what, for example, the international treaties signed by states say about the business role on an issue, in a nutshell. And this idea of reporting on sustainability does resonate with the idea of financial reporting. So the premises are simple or GRI similar. The standardization, credible process, and assurance of this information, but the idea is quite different. So this is to have information that is needed for all stakeholders beyond just the, for example, investors. And what you see also on the slides on the left is our universal standards. So they're called this way because they contain general disclosure requirements around company strategy, governance, workforce, stakeholder engagement process, all of which are needed to understand what company does and how it impacts the world. Then on the right, we have the topic standards that have disclosures on specific topics. So the name speaks for themselves. And in the middle is our latest addition, so the sector standards, which we started putting forward because we noticed that companies that were reporting basically on different topics, and we wanted to drive more standardization basically and see the same topics reported by companies in the same sector, so that that could be compared, for example, their performance, and certain thresholds could be established and so on. So moving on to the core notion of impact. So that's really the main premise of the GRI standard. So the impact on economy, environment, and people, so-called outward impacts. And again, this definition came through the alignment with United Nations guiding principles, as well as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development instruments. So we all operate the same terminology, and we strive for updating our standards and aligning this terminology every time there is an update. And we also see now that the financial community has been sensitized and sensibilized by this notion of impact and going beyond this financial considerations, and are now taking this thinking back to the financial statements, trying to quantify the monetary value or value destruction sometimes behind impacts. And we will talk about the policy developments also in a bit. Next. Yeah, some words about why GRI standards are so occupying such a central place in sustainability reporting, and when we talk about like business and human rights or business and environment, that is because of the GRI's 27 years of existence. So we really were one of the first organizations that started dealing with this business responsibility with regards to outward impacts. And we have currently highest adoption rates as the reporting framework for preparing a sustainability report, or for example, also preparing data for rankers and raters and so on. And we have very strong reference in governmental policies, but also stock exchange rules. We get referenced regularly in the instruments by UN agencies and in international NGOs. Again, when they talk about business responsibility, with regards to certain issue. And the pool of issues is really broad. It can be social protection sometimes, it can be sexual and reproductive rights of women, and so on. And also we are certainly viewed as a neutral and credible body. As I mentioned, we don't represent the view of a single consistency, which is very important because sometimes there can be a sustainability body that is largely driven by business, for example, or maybe driven by the civil society, where sometimes there can be no buy-in from business to go that far. So that is in a nutshell what GRI is about. And my main part today is about global policy making on sustainability around the world, to give you this broad context and some meal for thought. So first of all, the pressure and what is shaping our thinking. I mean, by our, and don't only mean GRI, but I think also the governmental agencies, but also businesses. So really everyone involved into this ecosystem that thinks about sustainability. The pressure is coming from the global level to the states level to adopt policies, and these policies affect, again, governmental agencies, but also companies. So I have included here on the slide a few key treaties that marked significant changes in terms of what we consider important. This is not an exhaustive list, but I'm sure that the topics covered here do resonate with you. So Paris Agreement and certainly the emissions or climate change, the Global Biodiversity Framework, the most recent Kunming-Montreal outcome of the United Nations Biodiversity Conference, then also 2015, the SDGs that were mentioned today, and also the 2011 United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which also articulated the responsibility of all businesses in the world to uphold the basic human rights. And just I would also like to say a few words about the confusion that sometimes happens in the world today when we talk about these issues at business level. So we hear terms ranging from sustainability to ESG to responsible business conduct. And these are somewhat synonymous, but the basic premise is that ESG is concerned primarily with the risk management to the company itself, to an entity itself, and sustainability is this broader notion of public interest. While responsible business conduct often talks about assigning the responsibility to business, compliance with laws and regulations, and often has this extraterritorial component, talking about that the company should behave in a certain way, not only in their home jurisdiction, but also in all jurisdictions where they operate. They should uphold a certain level. And now also large firms are facing the integration of environmental and human rights due diligence, yet the latest comer to this discussion. So before we were talking about financial due diligence. So when you assess financial risk as opportunities, when, for example, there's a merger and acquisition. So this is a little bit the same, goes into the same direction. So this is about assessing impacts on environment and human rights, also in the process of signing new contracts or through the supply chain, for example, acquiring new suppliers and so on. So really, this is like a growing field and a very important one. Next slide. Here, I just wanted to illustrate all the complexity of topics that pertain to the sustainability field. And yeah, we saw on the previous slide that, for example, emissions and biodiversity are now very high on the radar. But now also with the potential UN plastics treaty, there will be a big discussion on pollution, and UN talks about the triple planetary crisis. So maybe we'll soon face also all the need to assess more with more rigor the information on waste and plastic pollution and so on. And you see in the middle the social topics, but also importantly, this economical governance topics such as tax, anti-corruption, our usual suspects when we talk about corporate governance. Next slide, please. And in response to all these issues and the need to regulate, basically, governments, but also financial regulators and stock exchanges, they respond with issuing what we refer to as policies, but they can be laws or guides or rules that codify governmental decisions. And really, for example, governmental subsidies and targets and national plans can reflect the need for businesses to provide certain information across these topics that we saw on the previous slide. There could be also reporting laws separately. So now we saw a big example in Europe with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, like a standalone law on sustainability reporting. Public procurement policies often have clauses on minimizing impacts on environment, for example, and also upholding human rights. Then I mentioned the environmental and human rights due diligence laws, again, big example in Europe, but not only. There are also such laws on individual topics, so social laws, for example, law to conduct due diligence with regards to forced labor in the supply chain or child labor in the supply chain, and there could be even import bans on products that where it's not possible to demonstrate that they're not linked to these issues. Then we also see sustainable finance taxonomies, where also the ESG data is often a building block, because to allocate financing to a certain project, you need to assess data, and there is an intersection which data you assess. So it's often, again, emissions, potential emissions, and potential harm to the environment versus the benefits that project creates. Then we see stock exchange listing rules that also say that, for example, to be listed on a stock exchange, company must have transparent reports or sustainability reports highlighting all the impacts on the topics from the previous slides. And then we also see taxation developments. So, for example, carbon taxes that also are different for companies depending on their emissions and emission reduction targets. So really this very broad universe. Moving on to the global sustainability reporting trends. So as I mentioned, interest in sustainability reporting is all-time high. And we see from the KPMG report study, basically in 58 jurisdictions, but also the 500 Fortune companies, that from the largest 250 companies, almost every company has disclosed sustainability data in their reports. And as I mentioned, GRI remains the most dominant standard. But also we see now that what was voluntary for so many years and what was seen as doing good, what was seen maybe as a CSR effort, is now a matter of governmental concern. So this is hence the push for mandatory sustainability laws. Then we also see this practice of external assurance here, as I mentioned, coming also from the financial world, because the information must be credible. And we know that sometimes, depending on how you calculate it, there can be variances. There should be basically a third party looking into it. And if this information is then used by governments, but also by other stakeholders, it must be of highest quality. And then we see also harmonization and convergence in the reporting landscape. That is because there were so many different ways of again, thinking what is important on a topic. So someone unmuted. Yeah, and so there is more and more convergence with this big reporting regimes, for example, being legislated, and different organizations that have high credibility, for example, in the financial world, such as International Sustainability Standards Board of the IFRS, emerging also to standardize basically what is material and relevant for investors from sustainability perspective. And then we also see, and what GRI also is strongly advocating for, is this double materiality perspective, is that basically companies must treat on an with equal importance their financial information and their sustainability information, and basically look at impacts from both angles, whether they have a monetary impact on the bottom line of an entity or not. On the next slide, you can see also different names that maybe also you hear with regard when talking about the sustainability reporting or the sustainability landscape. So there are standard setters like ourselves, which we basically write these rules for presenting and disclosing the information. Then there are frameworks on individual topics. So TCFD was the framework on climate, the TNFD is a framework on nature. Then again, indices, rankings, and ratings that before were concerned solely with financial information are now integrating sustainability data, so S&P, Sustainalytics. And also there are certifications, so they can be applied to companies, but also to products. Sometimes, for example, in agriculture, there are lots of certifications to say that a product is done in conformity with certain rules. Voila, so really different types of organizations are concerned with the same or slightly, let's say, different, but the same direction, semi-directional mission. And that is why, moving on, we see the surge in policies, and we run this database, which is called Carrots and Sticks at GRI. You can find it online. So there we track and we add policies that emerge in countries. And you can see on this map that only few territories are colored in gray, where basically currently we don't have policies on sustainability or ESG recorded. And again, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no policies there. So also just a word of caution there that we add these policies as we find them, and it's quite a laborious process. But that's still the most complete database. So really, most territories now have some form of ESG or reporting policies on sustainability. And that you can also see on the next slide. So that is the growth in policies. So currently in our database, we record 2,463 policies from 132 countries. So really already most countries in the world, and it's growing, the number in the database. And I wanted also to highlight a little bit, many words on the slide, but we wanted just to highlight what is going on right now in the world. And again, this is not exhaustive because we see every day, literally every day, we are being asked, for example, to provide an opinion or make a submission because there is a new law, because there is a new project of law. And you can see that in some very big jurisdictions now, there are developments. So China recently released stock exchange rules also for companies to disclose based on this double materiality approach information. And now we also see that the Ministry of Finance of China has just introduced a bill to make it basically country-wide, so not only for companies traded on the stock exchange. Canada is making laws also on sustainability reported, but also on RBC due diligence. So again, this notion that companies must assess the impacts also that they have extraterritorially when they operate outside of Canada. And they're also looking even to revise their Business Corporations Act, which is defining the purpose and obligations of companies. So it's really the core of a corporation. So they are looking to integrate their language on minimizing risks to the environment and also transparent sustainability reporting. So I'll just stop here. Yeah. This is to illustrate the developments, and the growth is also happening, well, in many regions, the growth is excessively high, but all regions are growing. So really there is no region currently where number of sustainability policies would not be growing. And now coming back to the adoption of GRI in policy. So currently we see that the GRI standards are referenced or required in 259 policies in 85 countries. So again, it's a high number. If you remember before, I was talking about 130 countries having these policies. So we are referenced or required in 85 of these, and it continues growing, as I mentioned, because we do engage with all those policymakers around the globe. Next slide, you can see the examples of GRI adoption in policies. So what we mean by GRI being adopted. So here are some examples. So EU, the big sustainability reporting directive that now sort of also has this extraterritorial implications because EU is one of the major trading partners in the world for many countries. So there is a mentioning of GRI in the context that companies can report, for example, on topics which are currently not included in the suite, because also Europe is developing their standard that companies can use the GRI standards, for example, to report on the topic. In Sweden, in the middle, there is a law that says that all state-owned enterprises must produce a GRI report. And you can see also mandatory state laws on the right. And I'll stop here with the policies in countries, and you can basically look at this slide after in more detail to see these examples if you're interested. And a few words just on final few words on the practice and of assurance. So we also see that the GRI standards are most assured, but still that there is a need to grow this assurance practice because currently the sustainability reports are not assured as much as financial reports. And to also comment and talk through what I mentioned before on the convergence between the financial world and sustainability world. On the next slide, you see this double materiality concept illustration. So basically, company impacts the world outside, and also the world impacts on the company. So basically, company financials can change. So, for example, I don't know, through fines or through expenses allocated to reduce emissions and so on. So that's what we call the double materiality principle. And we, as GRI, we are advocating for considering companies that have the impacts that companies have on outside world, regardless of their immediate financial impact on the financials of the company, because simply on the next slide, we see that these impacts, if they're not financially material for company at the moment of reporting, most, if not all significant impacts of companies in the end up becoming financially material issues and costing money to the company and costing money to the economy. And I think it's easy to think of examples where it works this way. And that is why we see that the three largest sustainability standards initiatives, so the GRI one in the middle, the European one that currently has the highest extraterritorial effect in the world, but also the financial one by the IFRS Foundation or their board called ISSB, so that they are complementary, and basically that there is, as I mentioned before, this direction to harmonize and converge, and it also, I mean, results in basically GRI being present in the standard setting processes of these organizations and signing the MOUs, so memorandums of understanding, to align our work programs and see where we can even align further our disclosure requirements. Yeah, I would stop here. I would like to stop here. Yeah, and I will pass it on to Camila. I don't know if we want to break for any burning questions now, or otherwise proceed with the agenda.
Actually, I wanted to ask either Richard or someone in the audience regarding the slide, Margaret, that you presented on the International Federation of Accountants. That stated, so the state of play of assurance, where you could see that SG related information, like less than 1% of SG related information is assured. Does that ring a bell? And the latest state of play of assurance that was released this year also covered the year 2022. And if I remember correctly, it was 0% of SG related information is assured. So I would like to give the floor to Richard or someone in the audience to share their views on this data point. Someone who would like to comment on that data point, or how do you experience that in the region, considering that you have developed performance audit methodologies and you're reviewing the implementation of the SDGs? Yeah.
Camilla, I think the presentation that was done is still quite fresh on the minds of people. They'll still be doing a bit of reflection. So I suggest we continue while reflection happens, and then people will post their questions, and then maybe after your presentation we can now open it up and then share these views and concerns about them. Thanks.
Sure. Happy to discuss further, and happy to continue with the presentation. I wanted to make it as dynamic for the audience as possible. Briefly about me, I'm Camila Corradi, originally from Argentina, but I'm based in Amsterdam, where GRI Secretariat is based. I'm part of the policy team, and I've been the lead on our sustainable development work, specifically on reaching the sustainability reporting with the Sustainable Development Agenda and the private sector contributions to the SDGs. I'm currently focused on leading our advocacy and global efforts and engagements in multilateral platforms and international forums such as the UN General Assembly, the High-Level Political Forum, Sustainable Development, and some other engagements such as the COP. And previously at GRI, I led corporate programs on the Seek to Advance business reporting on the SDGs, and has the quality of reporting on the Sustainable Development Goals. So briefly, I wanted to briefly mention, because Douglas covered this in his introduction, and by now you all should be very familiarized by the 17 SDGs. So I'm going to shine a spotlight on specifically on target 12.6. That's where corporate sustainability reporting is explicitly mentioned, and it is aimed at policymakers or member states, as I was stating in the introduction. And for you to know that GRI was part of the advocacy forces behind these specific SDG targets, doing the negotiations to ensure that corporate sustainability would be reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. And we see, even though it's reflected on SDG 12.6, we see that the practice of corporate sustainability reporting can support progress, measurement of progress across all 17 SDGs. And through SDG 12, companies are urged, as you can see on the screen, to track their contributions to the SDGs or embed sustainability reporting, integrate sustainability information to a reporting cycle. And if they use GRI standards, they will be able to disclose their impacts of their activities through their sustainability reports. Yeah. And you might be wondering, like, why a target on sustainability information, and this is related to what I'm going to address afterwards, because it is crucial to capture the contribution and impact of the private sector to make an accurate assessment of progress towards the SDGs at the national level. So even though the SDGs are the global agenda, the implementation of the SDGs also happen at the national, regional, and global levels as well. And the practice of sustainability reporting can support national measurement processes, which is the topic of my presentation today, processes and mechanisms by enabling the businesses to manage their impacts, understand, manage, and communicate their impacts, and contribute therefore to the SDGs. So at GRI, following the adoption of the SDGs, at GRI we found out that there was a need to develop a common language and an understanding and a uniform mechanism for businesses to report on the contributions and the impacts of the SDGs in an effective and comparable way. Because as you may know, the SDGs were mainly developed and targeted for member states, so for governments, so businesses really struggle to translate the SDGs into a business language. So at GRI, we've been committing to enabling the private sector to integrate the SDGs within the reporting processes in accordance with the GRI standards by developing, maintaining, and disseminating relevant tools. And I want to know that there are explicit references to the SDGs in the GRI standards themselves, but I'm not going to take a deep dive into that. And we also support the private sector with SDG reporting processes by providing services, training, and peer-to-peer learning, such as corporate groups, but also trainings on the GRI Academy. And we work with several partners on developing those tools. And maybe more relevant for you is the most relevant aspect for you is that we've been supporting and engaging with policymakers and investors in engaging with the private sector on the SDGs to align and maximize their contributions. And in this sense, we advance dialogue and use of sustainability reporting as a source of data to access the private sector contributions to the SDGs and link it with national mechanisms and systems for tracking SDG implementation. And also at the global level, we've been engaging with the relevant international organizations and multilaterals, and we participate in annual forums as well with the aim of strengthening local and international policy on sustainable development and sustainability reporting. So briefly, I'm going to I wanted to highlight with this slide, but it was already addressed by Douglas and by Margarita, that the focus on the focus of the GRI standards is the impact perspective, and with the GRI standards, the GRI standards can be used by companies, organizations to communicate progress on the sustainable development goals. So I'm going to briefly mention what is already available, that all the tools and resources that we developed so far for businesses and reporting practitioners that you're aware that these resources exist and might be useful for you in your engagement with companies, but I'm not going to take a deep dive into these resources. So as I mentioned, we've been engaging with different stakeholders on how to translate the SDGs into a language that businesses could use to embed in their reporting, corporate reporting practice, existing reporting practices. And since the SDGs were launched, we've been developing tools and resources to support organizations in this endeavor. So we are going to share the slide with you, and you will be able to access each one of these publications or guidance or tools afterwards. But for you to be aware that this exists. Well, with the UN Global Compact, we have delivered an action platform for reporting on the SDGs. It was a groundbreaking and pioneer initiative where we developed several guidance documents and tools for companies to embed the SDGs. And I wanted you to know that this year we are launching the analysis of the goals and targets at the high-level political forum that is taking place in July this year in New York, but also online. And this year we have, so the analysis of the goals and targets is an inventory of existing disclosures at the level of the 169 targets. And there are over 5,600 disclosures that companies could use to measure their contributions to the SDGs based on, we have mapped over 26 available standards and frameworks that could be used for this based on authoritative standards and frameworks available out there. So we translated the PDF document that's over 500 pages into an online database, much more user-friendly, and we're launching that database at the HLPF this year on 11 July, actually, with the UN Global Compact. So you will are more than welcome to join us in this launch event, and hope it's useful. It's useful for you. There are more tools and documents with insights from corporates that we gathered so far since 2016 and 17. And we also have an SDG podcast that we invite you also to listen in on insights on driving the sustainable development agenda. But the purpose or the main objective of my presentation today is to share how GRI has been supporting policymakers and to strengthen national measurement systems. So, as I was mentioning, to make an accurate assessment of progress on the SDGs, it is crucial to capture the contribution and impact of the private sector. And to make such data available, governments need to encourage companies to disclose sustainability information as called on SDG 12.6, and then use the information to assess business contributions and impacts to sustainable development and to the SDGs. Only then will the business contribution to the SDGs be reflected and included in the measurement system, is that they will lead to a more complete picture of the reality of the implementation of the SDGs at the national or regional levels. So I'm going to present some insights, high-level insights on trends and our annual analysis on the private sector role in the VNRs that we do every year, the policy team at GRI does every year. As you can see, it's highlighted on the slide deck. And also I'm going to share some policy recommendations on using corporate reporting to strengthen sustainable development goals. And end my presentation with some next steps regarding the United Nations High-Level Political Forum this year in July, and also our engagement at the UN General Assembly in September this year. So I was mentioning the GRI policy team carries out every year on a regular basis an analysis of the private sector role in the voluntary national reviews on SDG 12.6 implementation. And so the UN member states are invited to regularly report on the implementation of the SDGs at the national level through their voluntary national review processes, which happen every year in July in New York, and VNRs are presented at the high-level political forum, and this is part of the review mechanisms for the 2030 agenda. So I will take a deep dive into the the progress since 2016. I'm going to share some preview of the insights that we are presenting at the high-level political forum in July this year, on 9th July, with in an official event with us, JIRA and UNEP as well. And in 2023, we have made an assessment of how member states are involving the private sector in the implementation of the SDGs, and how they're monitoring progress on their SDG implementation, in particular SDG 12.6. As you can see, the high-level trends that we have identified based on the VNR analysis in 2023, from the VNR presented in 2023, is that governments and the private sector are working together more on SDG implementation, and the preview of the data, and please do not share because it will be officially presented in July, is that 100% of the reports, VNR reports, reference the public-private partnerships as a means of achieving the SDGs. And I wanted to mention or echo what Richard was saying at the beginning of this presentation, that about not working in silos, and we need to engage all actors in society to really drive the agenda. And 91% of countries reference the private sector involvement in VNR processes. So that means that governments and the private sector, so the VNR acts as a platform for governments and the private sector to engage on these discussions around driving the sustainable development agenda. And also 93% of the VNR reports refer to private sector contribution towards the SDGs. So governments are looking at how the private sector are contributing to the SDGs. Even though references to sustainability reporting are on the rise, availability of data on SDG 12.6 remain low. And this refers to a presentation that Margarita, or the data points that Margarita shared before. So sustainability reporting, mandatory sustainability reporting is increasing worldwide, but countries are not, this is not reflected on the monitoring process or the VNRs that countries are presenting at the high-level political forum. So 63% in 2023, 63% of reports reference transparency and sustainability reporting, which is a significant increase from the first years of the VNRs back in 2016. But when this figure was, if I remember correctly, 20%. Yeah, 20%. So there is a significant increase. However, reference to sustainability reporting frameworks are not always referenced in VNRs. So the numbers of VNRs referencing GRI consistently grows. However, there is a disconnect between what is reported in the VNRs and sustainability reporting policies worldwide. And that's what Margarita presented before. And monitoring specific SDGs in VNRs that not show their pattern. And what I mean with this is that SDG 12 is referenced extensively in policy, but neglected in VNRs. So said differently, SDG 12 is being prioritized in sustainability policies across the globe and by companies in their sustainability report, but this is not translating to VNR's reports and national reporting of progress at the country level of the SDGs. So we observe a disconnect between the SDGs that are appearing in VNRs and global sustainability policy and the most reported SDGs by the private sector. So there's room there to align on sustainability reporting policies worldwide, and that is reflected in VNR reports, specifically when it comes to tracking progress on SDG 12.6. So if we look at the policy recommendations that we developed at GRI, so our policy recommendations aim to help governments to make an accurate assessment of our progress on the SDGs and the contributions and impact of the private sector captured through reporting by using the GRI standards. So one of the first recommendations that we learned so far, and And this is also based on an experience from governments and engaging with the governments in different regions. Is the first one is to start by engaging with the private sector at every step of the SDG implementation process. So when developing and monitoring national SDG implementation plans, it is crucial to engage with all stakeholders, including the private sector. And by including businesses in these discussions at every stage, policy actors can facilitate alignment of priorities and understand what specific contributions major industries and sectors can make at national level. Then another recommendation is to enforce and facilitate transparency and the disclosure of sustainability contributions to the SDGs by the private sector. And in this sense, what we mean is that policy actors can support transparency and reporting practices by different means, such as adopting mandatory sustainability reporting requirements and providing guidelines in line with what Margarita was presenting before. Another one is to align with existing sustainability reporting practices used by the private sector, and this is key not to create any additional burden for sustainability reporters. So we always recommend taking into account the state of play of sustainability reporting nationally, and based on that, policy actors can facilitate the alignment and reinforce effective existing practices without creating any additional burden. For instance, relying on internationally recognized reporting frameworks and standards such as GRI standards, which is necessary to enable a common language for engaging the private sector. Another recommendations that we developed based on our experience engagement with policymakers is to develop a measurement and monitoring tool to track the private sector contribution to the SDGs. And we can share more information about other projects that we implemented mainly in Latin America, so in Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. Existing tools that are used to keep track of contribution by the private sector, by companies, which is essential to ensure that progress and implementation of the goals at the national level. So there are already mechanisms that enable or facilitate data, that the data the businesses disclose, they provide through, that they disclose through their sustainability, the usual sustainability reports they can submit and through a platform, and they constitute a source of information at the national level, which can help policy actors understand the contributions of specific sustainability areas within industries and sectors. And we have a very good example on how that translated in Colombia, particularly through the SDG Corporate Tracker, that provided the information that the government needed on how companies were contributing to the national prioritized SDGs. And then they realized that they didn't have to develop new policies, but adjust current existing policies. So this platform enabled policymakers to make small adjustments to the current policies, and it has been a huge success for policymakers, but also for companies as well. And then finally, enable dialogue between investors, businesses, and policy actors to maximize positive impacts on the goals. And this is crucial for driving the sustainable development forward, it's crucial that this dialogue focuses on how to maximize positive contributions or positive impacts, and how to minimize, prevent and minimize negative ones. So based on the information collected and the objectives set by national governments, and through collaboration with different actors at the national level, can reinforce alignment with national priorities, and also trigger processes on how to maximize positive contributions. So establishing regular dialogue can increase collaboration. As a next step, then I wanted to again highlight that we are presenting the insights from our VNR analysis from last year at the HLPF this year with UNEP on the 9 July, and I'm happy to share also the registration afterwards with all of you. Will we be taking a dive and engaging the policy dialogue on how to enhance SDG 12.6 implementation. And then we will be launching the analysis of the goals and targets online database with the UN Global Compact on 11 July. Now, looking at our global engagements, you may be aware that United Nations will host the Summit of the Future, Multilateral Solutions for a Better Tomorrow in New York in September this year. And the Summit of the Future seeks to address gaps in global governance and reaffirm existing commitments, including advancing or turbocharge, as the United Nations says, SDG implementation. And an action-oriented Pact of the Future will be adopted by consensus by all member states at the UN General Assembly this year. And currently, they are negotiating the pacts for the future through intergovernmental negotiations and stakeholder inclusion as well. And so far, so the Pact for the Future has been launched on 14 May, their revisited version. And Action 47 under reforming the international financial architecture, it includes one concrete step is supposed to be an action-oriented Pact of the Future. So it urges or encourages member states to take concrete steps to ensure that the private sector, specifically large corporations, contributes to sustainability and protecting our planet, including through strengthening reporting procedures and well, making ratings of investment projects more credible. So I wanted to, I'm willing to open the floor to the audience and hear from you your insights on how. So this for us is the what. Governments are stating that it's needed, so we need to strengthen reporting procedures. But what does that mean? How we can do that, and why we should do that. So I look forward to hearing from you in this regard. Thank you so much. And I would like to give the floor either to Douglas or Richard to take on this dialogue.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Camila and Margarita. Quite some technical discussions going out here. Colleagues, like we promised from the first webinar where we didn't have too much time for questioning, we said we're going to make amends. This is amends time. So we have the floor open for a few questions. However, we have some open discussion questions on the floor if you want to make contributions on them. I want to acknowledge a few people who have also joined us. Off the top of my head, I see Mr. Edmond Shoko, responsible for emerging areas at the AFROSAI-E. Thank you very much, brother leader, for joining us. I see colleagues from all over our region, from Ethiopia, from Botswana, from Ghana, from Rwanda. So it's a very, very rich audience we have here. Colleagues, let's just open up now, see what questions we have for our friends who we are going to have again, hopefully. I see Camilla is smiling already. We're going to have them again, hopefully, so we can do a more deep dive into these issues. So I'll leave the floor open for questions. However, while we wait for questions, colleagues, there was this conversation I saw in your recommendations. You spoke about the recommendation you hope to make to the national, the high level political platform. There was the issue of data availability. Data availability. As I mentioned to you, we have done some audits. Data has always been a challenge. Data has been a challenge. And the thing of data for us from the auditing perspective is data now becomes the source of evidence we produce for the audits. Strangely, these countries we are auditing seem not to have data, but they are producing voluntary national review reports on the SDGs. So, having been in the field for these years, for a while now, how do we get this data? Because we have this strong feeling the data is available, we just don't know where to find it. How do we get this data? Are there alternative sources apart from the national systems? If you're not getting it from national systems, are there alternative sources that you could help us with? This is just these two of my mind now. So while we look at it, we could take other questions. I see a hand from Pacific from Rwanda.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Pacific. Go ahead.
Okay, I can start by thanking the presenters for the good presentation made. And I have a question which is kind of similar from the one you come to put on board. Talking about sustainability actually means the involvement of private sector, and then bringing on board the private sector landscape on the issue of data. When we talk about data, we also highlight the systems in place to allow the data availability in those companies, private companies. And my question was, government institutions, how will they engage those private companies? For example, for those systems to collect data, bearing in mind that in some instances, those systems may incur extra cost for those companies to get them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pacific. Yes, colleagues, we could start. Camilla.
Yeah, I'm happy to share an example, well, to continue sharing about the example in Colombia and Peru and Mexico through the SDG Corporate Tracker, but maybe Douglas is able to share also regional experiences. So in this, the SDG Corporate Tracker is an initiative, a joint initiative in partnership with the UNDP, Business Call to Action, and also national governments, for instance, the National Planning Department in Colombia, in the case of Colombia. And so it's a GRI, UNDP, and national governments partnership. And they engage with, so the GRI has a strong GRI community in these countries. So GRI is already engaging with companies in this regard. But also the government, they bring all the business associations at the business level or industry associations at the business level. And actually it's the business associations or unions as well, that they're engaged with companies in gathering the data. And they themselves also train companies within that business association on strengthening sustainability reporting practices to enhance the quality of the data, because the SDGs brings a different level of complexity for companies. So they train them to enhance the quality of the reported data, and they also help with the submission of that data that is disclosed through sustainability report, and filling that into the platform that then the government collects, aggregates and collects all the data. So it's critical to engage and partner with business association, unions, or any group that groups companies. They're a key partner in implementation of these kind of processes. Yeah. Maybe Douglas also can share other examples, or Margarita also as well.
Thanks, Camila. I think, like I mentioned in my opening remarks, I think data, as Richard has put it, remains a challenge, not just in terms of accessing the data, Richard, but I think also questions and reservations on the integrity of the data. I think there are also reservations for some stakeholders to include some of the data because it would not have been verified. There's also high incidences of what is called greenwashing. Companies may be overstating their sustainability performance, while maybe understating some of the negative impacts I recall attending the inaugural data forum that was organized by the United Nations Statistics Department in Cape Town. And I think the integrity of data was quite a pertinent issue, especially with regards to including data that has not gone through the statistical rigor into national reporting. There were quite some strong reservations on that. But at the same time, like you are saying, many other governments are also looking at including data from the so-called non-traditional sources. And as Camilla has pointed out, this could be data from generated through sustainability reports. And accompanying that is also the call to have these sustainability reports assured so that there's more integrity in the process used to generate the data, as well as integrating the sustainability reporting process itself. Other data sources, like mentioned, could be from trade unions, could be from NGOs. There are quite a few countries, if I recall, that have gone to that extent of incorporating data from non-traditional sources into their national voluntary reporting, but both still rely on the traditional sources for data to include in their national reporting. I think your country, Ghana, if I recall from the African Roundtable on Sustainable Development, Ghana, I think Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria are probably maybe leading or have more lessons in terms of incorporating non-traditional sources of data into their national reporting. But yeah, like I said, data could be available, but they also issues from some stakeholders with regards to the quality of the data as well as the integrity of the data. That's why as GRI, although it's not really a requirement to comply with the GRI standards, we do encourage companies to seek assurance for their sustainability data. And I think there was a slide that was shared earlier on in terms of the levels of assurance of sustainability of data from sustainability reports. And I know from the EY report on excellence in integrated reporting for South Africa, assurance levels were pretty much around 58%. But of the top 100 reports, their sustainability reports assured. But of that 58%, I think only 11% have gone to the extent of reasonable assurance. The rest were pretty much maybe limited assurance or assurance of a few selected topics in publishing their reports. So I think the data is a challenge, and what we are also trying to do as an organization is to work on the generation of comparable data through the standards. Data that is not only comparable, but has a high level of integrity in terms of how it is generated by the application of the GRI standards. I don't know, my colleague Bongo, there was a workshop on the VNR process in South Africa held on Monday. I don't know if Bongo, you would want to share a few probably takeaways on how South Africa is approached the VNR report that it is going to present at the upcoming high-level political forum. If there are probably any one or two lessons, especially around the incorporation of data from non-traditional sources.
Thanks, Douglas. And Good morning or good afternoon to you all. As Douglas mentioned, South Africa has just completed its composition methodology of the current VNR. One of the things that stood out, especially around the collection of data, was coordination amongst national and regional government, specifically with SALGA, which is the local government component, helping to coordinate collecting data from municipalities themselves to compile an LNR report that will inform the final VNR. There was also, because most of the data that's collected that goes into the VNR usually comes from sources such as state essays, tracking sustainable development goals, country reports, but also we saw through UN Global Compact and industry associations as well participating in a process of sharing data from the private sector, but also some of that data, of course, was through the lens of ESG rather than just the SDGs themselves. So there was quite a coordinated effort across government and the private sector for the past 2 years, mostly supported by industry associations as reflected earlier, but also a strong component of incorporating sources from the local and traditional government level, which you wouldn't maybe see in other countries.
All right. Thanks, Bongo. I don't know if Richard, we have addressed the question.
Yes, sure. Sorry, Pacific, you may have to mute your. Thank you very much, Pacific, for muting. Yes, I think to a large extent we have addressed the question, but there are still a few hanging issues around it, which we may not be able to address totally here, because having heard these presentations and having heard what you said, there's also that challenge on us to look through what's available, what is happening within the space of SDGs, and to see what we can do as auditors. So yes, thank you very much. I still want to keep the line open. Sorry, Douglas, come through.
No, I think from our end, we also wanted to learn from you in terms of how you also incorporating data from non-traditional sources in the audits and reviews that you are undertaking as AFROSAI, or as Bongo mentioned, you only looking at data that is coming from the national statistical systems.
Great, sure. Colleagues, this is open to all of us. We have done some audits, so from the various national perspectives, let's share. However, from my side, sitting on top at the AFROSAI-E, getting a bird's eye view, I think we have generally depended on the traditional sources, data sources. We haven't explored so much on the non-traditional because of issues of mostly mandates from the Supreme Audit institutions. We also haven't explored so much the issue of stakeholder engagement. So we have done so much with traditional sources, the statistical services, the Ministry of Finances. So that I think becomes a problem when we don't have data from those sources. Generally, your mandates pushes you to places where government has some hand in. Government has done some spending, government has some kind of hold. So that is where we move normally towards getting data, and that's where the challenges come. But having heard of the non-traditional sources, it's an area I think we could explore to help with our data collection and with the measurements of implementation of these SDGs, especially in the field of the natural sciences, the environment areas, because those are the difficulties. Not to talk too much, but let me share a little experience with an audit that was done on coastal systems, management of coastal environments. It has to do with a marine ecosystem. Now, people go to do these audits. Countries have not developed performance indicators or systems or monitoring indicators to tell whether they are doing well or not. But countries are still reporting on progress being made.
Hello. I don't know whether it's on my end, Richard, but I think I lost
Richard,
you.
we've lost
Or
your audio.
I think it's from Richard's end.
Yeah, go off.
Yes, we can hear you
Yes,
now. Continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm back. Yes. So I was saying that maybe we have overemphasized our strength on the traditional sources of data. We haven't had too much to do from the non-traditional sources. But I don't know. It's still open. Colleagues in the group, maybe you could, if you're still here, you could share with us your own experience with the use of traditional sources of data or the non-traditional. So we learn together. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, Richard. Hello.
hello,
I can hear
I
you, Michael.
Michael.
Continue.
You can
Yes.
yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. This is Michael from Ghana, and I was also part of one of the audit reports on the coastal audit of the coastal environment. And what we realized was that there were some non-traditional methods, but then all these non-traditional methods need to be routed through the statistical service of Ghana. And it made it very difficult because if they don't report to statistical service, then statistical service also tells us that they don't have a means of measuring and monitoring. Fortunately for us, statistical service had developed, there's a citizen data science to measure and take readings from our coastal environment. But with this, it also had to go through, because it was started by what do you call it, a university, also had to come to them for validation to check for the quality. And so we couldn't also rely on that because they had still not been able to do that. And then their excuse was that the UN had not developed. During the implementation of the SDG 14.1b, the UN had not developed indicators. So they were now finding ways to develop indicators to measure this. So these are some of the challenges we have. So though we reported on it, we could still not measure whether we're making progress on those indicators. Thank you.
I would like to make a comment there, and thank you so much, Michael, for sharing, because indeed, not all targets have indicators being developed, and that's why, yeah, the HLPF, every year, the HLPF, the SDGs are being reviewed and reassessed. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge. And we do hear, especially through engagement with UNEP, that we engage with policymakers or countries, that they do struggle to measure. So not only the private, it's a level of complexity for the private sector to assess their impacts on the SDGs and the contributions, but also it is a challenge for governments all over the world how to measure SDG implementation. So that's really, that's a challenge that most governments are facing. So indeed, yeah. So this year, the SDGs under review is SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 17, so partnership for the goals, and I'm missing one more. So 5 SDGs under review this year. And something to take into consideration is that in 2027, there will be an SDG summit. So last year, at the midpoint of the 2030 agenda, and in September last year, there was an SDG summit, the first one. And the next one will be in July, in 2027. And in that SDG, the purpose of that SDG summit will be to review and start negotiating and discussing what's coming next after we reach the 2030 deadline for the SDGs. So that's in the agenda, and yeah, it's something that we should take into consideration also for developing long-term strategies and policies. Well, it's good to start following the negotiations on what might be coming next after the SDGs, how a post-2030 agenda looks like. So there's something to keep into consideration.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Camilla. Thank you, colleagues. I see here Josephine Makumba, that's my boss. I'm sure she would want to pass a comment or two. Josie, if you're available, you could pass a comment or two as we bring this our session to a close. And while Josie gets ready, colleagues, if you have any other biting questions that we are not able to solve here, please do well to reach us on AFROSAI-E. We will do well to send it through to GRI. We are going to have this relationship with them for ever and ever, I hope. So we are still going to have to speak to them. Douglas and colleagues, thank you so much. Maybe we take a few comments from Josie.
All right. Maybe before Justin comes in, Richard, thank you for the opportunity. And if I recall, I think we're going to have a broader workshop sometime in July. I don't know if the regional meeting is still planned. From our previous discussion, we're working on was it a regional or continental-wide workshop or conference set for Zimbabwe somewhere in July?
Yes. No, we'll have a discussion on that right after here. We'll have a discussion. I'll get through to you and then we'll talk on that one.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. All right, Josie.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I just came in the end. Actually, when I came in, I was just checking if the webinar is still on because the time had already gone past. But just from the few issues that I got, it looks like it was quite interesting and informative. And we thank our partners, GRI, for this. And, you know, as we are going forward, as supreme audit institutions, you know, we have realized that life is just more than the debits and credits in the financial statements. And so we are venturing more and more into these other areas, which make an impact in the lives of the citizens throughout our region. And we are really very happy to partner you on these issues. And as Richard says, this is just the beginning. And we are going to have more interventions together. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's about our citizens. How can we, you know, just make that small dent in improving their lives? And these topics that are being discussed, they are really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much, Josie. I kind of picked up this garden thing today. I have no idea when. I always speak with my mute button on, but I hope you can hear me. Yes, thank you so much, Josie. Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much, GRI. Before I give Douglas the last word to close us on this session, I just want to make a few announcements. So like I mentioned in my opening remark, this is a 4-piece webinar we're having. This is our second. We should be having a third one somewhere in September, thereabout. And please be on the lookout, like they say in the social media space. Watch this space. We will send through information on the next piece. We just want to put together a lot of pieces that speak on the SDGs and how we can, as a team, private sector, public sector, auditors, government, policymakers, how we can together make a difference in the lives of citizens. So thank you very much from this side. I'll hand over to Douglas to give us his closing remarks, and then we'll not take too much of your time again. We can all say goodbye and go back to our desk. Douglas.
All right. Thank you, Richard. And once again, thank you for this opportunity. I won't take much time, seeing that we have already gone past the time that we had said. But it is quite encouraging to note the work that AFROSAI is doing in terms of driving and measuring the implementation of the SDGs. My opening statement, I quoted the UN ECOSOC report for 2023. Among its recommendations was to strengthen national and sub-national capacity, accountability, and public institutions to deliver accelerated SDG progress. And it's great to note the work that AFROSAI is doing in this regard. And like I mentioned, one of the presenters at the African Roundtable Forum on Sustainable Development, she did mention that we need a Ferrari to achieve the SDGs, but right now the Ferrari does not have tires. A good, efficient engine, but we are lacking the tires. And like we have discussed now, data is one of those tires that we need to inform the implementation of the of SDGs, strengthen the measurement, but also inform the choices that are needed in order to drive the acceleration. And on Monday, I attended another conference, and one of the presenters mentioned that right now we are actually building an aeroplane as we fly it. So we are flying the aeroplane, but at the same time we have to build it. That's the sort of the engines that is needed. And another quote from that conference was that as Africa, we need to be on the table. We need to be around the table and not just be on the menu of what is being discussed. And Josephine today just mentioned that life is more than credits and debits. So on these few calls, probably we can bring the session to a close, and we look forward to more engagements and more opportunities to collaborate with AFROSAI going forward. Thank you.